Welcome back to Inside Brussels, the European Conservatives news show. Thank you to all our viewers who have been watching our previous episodes, and a warm welcome to all the new ones interested in a conservative look at matters inside the EU bubble. As we are turning toward the upcoming EU elections, we are bringing topics with clear implications for the next legislative term ahead of us. Today, we're going to discuss one of the biggest goals set by the current EU leadership for the next few years: reforming the EU with the means of changing its internal treaties to accommodate potential new members by 2030. Most probably, the EU reform will be the single most important issue to decide after the elections. That's why we feel that it's important that Europeans know about what's being planned before they go to the ballots in June. In November last year, the European Parliament adopted a set of strongly federalist treaty change proposals. These proposals are designed to further centralize power in Brussels, but under the guise of making the EU more efficient. But so, how do they plan to achieve this? First, scrapping veto rights in the European Council, which consists of heads of state of the EU's member states. Scrapping veto rights in the EU Council, the institutions that has been the most direct source of democracy, basically means that any country, whether it's France or Hungary, would not be able to say no to EU policies that go against their national interests. They also plan to significantly reduce member states' competencies and placing key policy areas under exclusive EU jurisdiction so that EU countries would no longer have the freedom to craft their own path when it comes to foreign or defense policy, border control, or even public health. There are other initiatives like establishing a so-called European citizenship, creating transnational electoral lists, and even establishing the EU's own revenue sources, elements that we will further discuss with our distinguished guest in the studio today. Polish MEP Jacek Saryusz-Wolski, who was the ECR's shadow reporter on main reform proposals put forward by federalist forces, described what's happening as a plan to abolish sovereign member states and replace them with an EU superstate ruled by an unaccountable oligarchy absent of true democratic control. But none of this is settled yet. There are more and more conservative forces fighting these insane proposals, forces and voices like our esteemed guests here in the studio today. Kinga Gál, a conservative member of the European Parliament from the Fidesz party, and Thibault François, a member of the French Parliament representing Marine Le Pen's National Rally. Thank you so much, Ms. Gál, for joining us in the studio today. The linchpin, so to speak, of the proposed EU reforms put forward by the European Parliament so far is a transition from unanimous voting to qualified majority voting. What does this mean, and what are the implications, especially for smaller European countries who happens to be even conservative?
This trend, which is now more and more louder and louder requests by the European Parliament that member states should decide on issues, especially on foreign affairs issues, important issues, not with the so-called unanimity vote, but with the qualified majority. I think it's very dangerous, and it actually weakens the smaller, medium member states, their interest representation. It is not on vain that it was that time when the founding fathers of the Union decided that when the member states put together their interest representation and some of their sovereignty is put into the pot, they should get something which gives a guarantee that their interest is taken on board. On the other hand, it also strengthens the European Union when there is a unanimity vote. That means that is a consensus. That means that it is one voice. So whenever this unanimity is questioned, it actually weakens the EU, but what the tendency is for, and what we see from the left liberals in this parliament, what they are aiming with it, to weaken the member states in this process. The treaties are very clear. According to the treaties, these cannot be changed without treaty changes. And this is not very realistic that this could happen. So now the tendency is that they request in all kind of resolutions, reports, that it should be somehow put aside. And from a back door, this qualified majority voting system should be used. What we say that if the member states, smaller, medium-sized member states, are not given this possibility, then in most cases, even if it's against their interest, the larger member states, the stronger member states could put their position into the actual position of the EU. That is why, for example, the Central European member states, the Visegrad member states, were not absolutely against at the beginning and not very keen even now to opt for this qualified majority vote, and Hungary is absolutely against it. I have a very good example with the Migration Pact. This is an issue which is determining really how the EU will go on and how the EU member states will cope with thousands and thousands, hundred thousands of illegal migrants. It's a very serious issue where actually never the citizens of European Union were asked. If you ask them, as we asked in Hungary with national consultation, it was clear that their position is very much that the citizens should be able themselves to say with whom they would like to live with and how they foresee the future of their countries. Well, with the qualified majority voting, member states' opposition on this very substantive and very important issue could be neglected. And instead of deciding unanimously and listening to those voices who are against this, I think, a very big mistake what the EU is doing with this Migration Pact, and not listening to their own voters, actually they pushed forward with a qualified majority voting system. And now we are there that the parliament is giving its consent in the Committee of Civil Liberties today and in April in the plenary. And it will be even that so many member states, such a percentage of the population of the European Union are clearly against it.
It's great that you brought up the migration issue because the same proposals include placing 10 key policy areas exclusively or partially under EU competence, with Brussels having primacy in all, including foreign policy, environmental policy, border control, and even public health. How could they expect member states to give up their sovereignty to such extent?
These are those fields which were left explicitly and on purpose in the competence of the member states for so many years. And the EU could work and could develop with this, having a strong member state competencies on those issues which are really national, sometimes very close to national interest representation. So what you are mentioning, these 10 fields now, are above this whole issue about unanimity or qualified majority voting. It's even more dangerous because it clearly shows that the EU is especially Brussels bureaucracy decision taking, is putting its arm in all fields where before was never imagined in EU competence. And it was never imagined because it had its very good purpose not to have it, because that's why the member states could keep their sovereignty in these issues. It also strikes on the actual principle of the EU, basic principle, founding principle of the EU, on subsidiarity, that decisions should be taken on the closest level where those problems occur and how they can be and where they can be solved in the better way. So it's contradicting absolutely basic founding principles of the European Union. But what we see is now that this bubble here in Brussels, those in the European Parliament who actually are not, I can even say openly, they're not rooted very well in their own societies. They trend for decision-taking in Brussels, in the central. It's a very centralistic idea and perception, and taking roles, taking very important tasks from the member states. So actually weakening the member state competence. Of course, there are always big countries behind this because it's in their interest. And going back to your question about qualified majority versus unanimity, have you ever heard how many times actually big member states like Germany or France, if they didn't like a decision, that was not even put on the table because it was clear that it won't be a unanimity. But these discussions, these inside issues are never mentioned because at the end it has to be a unanimity. So those issues which are not liked or perceived in the right way by the big or larger countries, stronger countries, and they are not even on the table. So it's always those ones who can be put in the corner and saying that, oh yes, we misuse, like our government in Hungary, we misuse the right of veto. It's not that we are using more the right of veto than they are using others. It's only how it is perceived and presented to the public by the left liberals.
Conservative MEPs often talk about the leftists' plan to create a federal superstate, yet we hear very few about this in the news. Is Brussels purposefully trying to keep the public eye out of this question? And if so, how we can reclaim the democratic control?
What we have seen during the whole initiative and process of the Conference of Future of Europe was explicitly, deliberately put in that way that the conclusion should be towards a more federalistic, more centralist European Union. And it was presented as this would be the absolute aim of the people, especially the younger generations in Europe. And what our answer was on the right and conservative side of the European Parliament, that this whole process with coming up with that very questionable result was neither pluralistic nor democratic, and it was not at all legitimate, didn't have its legitimacy, because it was very interesting to see which NGOs' opinions was entered into the mainstream flow. Only those ones which were on the same idea. So if there were in member states civic initiatives which were on the contrary, saying that it's less federalism needed, those were not encouraged at all or was taken out of the process. And this is how the youth was actually brought in. It was not representative, it was not democratic. And afterwards they could say, oh, the whole Europe, that's what they... No, it's not the whole Europe who wants this. It's this elite, this mainstream who's pushing through its very dangerous ideas. But I hope in changes. We see that the people in Europe are watching. They are not interested in what the bureaucracy in Brussels is doing or what the bubble or some ideologists are doing. They have very important and big issues and big problems in Europe. And it's evident that sometimes the European Union, in cases where it's a really big problem, couldn't solve it. So it's necessary that the member states are on board. They have the democratic principle of elections. They have the responsibility, and they should be able to act. And this is very important. So I hope that during the elections, now in June, there will be a change in this whole concept, and we will go back to much more to the roots and to how the whole construction of the European Union was foreseen, and how the founding fathers thought about it, because that's very important. Because we like the European Union. That's our dream, and we don't want to give up due to some of ideological battles. So I do hope that on the conservative right side, we get stronger and really get to changes in this.
We hope for the same thing. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned, because we will shortly return with our second guest, Thibault François, the former Deputy Secretary General of the Identity and Democracy Group, and now a member of the French Parliament. But before that, let's watch our short interview with Pieter Cleppe, policy analyst and the editor-in-chief of Brussels Report. The Commission and the left act like two horizontal and vertical integration inherently depend on each other. Does the EU really need deeper integration and more centralization to accommodate new member states?
Well, it was actually the same with the previous round of treaty changes. This was also justified by enlargement. In order to function, we need to give more power to the European Union. That was the idea. They said if you have more member states, then there's a higher chance that they will block decisions. So you need to scrap vetoes. Now that's what happened with the Lisbon Treaty. And indeed, that's what they want to happen now. But of course, it's true that if you're with more, that there's a higher chance that people will obstruct things. But this is not a bad thing, because the problem in the European Union is that too much gets decided. And the European Commission has even admitted that in the last 20 years, there have been at least 3 big rounds where they were looking to deal with the cost of EU regulation. And today, the reason why we have the farmer protests, but also why industry is actually protesting, in Germany and Belgium last week, the industry federations raised the alarm about the cost of the green regulation. The reason is it has become way too easy to come up with new legislation. Also, from a democratic perspective, it is not healthy, I think, that democracies in the European Union are being outvoted. Look at the decision to outvote a number of Central and Eastern European countries on migration quotas. Back, I think it was in 2015, 2016, but they have repeated it recently. If there's one topic that is sensitive, it's migration. You can be in favor of more migration, less migration, and the way you do it is, of course, up for debate. But clearly, this is something that whatever choice you make, it has to be supported by democratic society. And democracy is still national. Yes, there is a European Parliament, but I don't think you can say that it works very well in the sense that there is no real connection with public opinion. It's some kind of UN-style assembly that is directly elected, yes, but that does not make it necessarily democratic because you don't see a lot of the concerns as much translated into the parliamentary debates as you see this happening at the national level.
The argument was also put forward that a more centralized EU will need its
own resources as well, for example, in the form of direct EU taxes that never existed before. How should we understand this, and what are the implications for the average citizen?
Yeah, taxation power will remain national, I think, for the foreseeable future. However, the EU has, during COVID, come up with this very shady scheme, the European Union Recovery Fund. But the biggest problem is the way that it is funded. And this is different from all the other budgets of the EU. Normally, the EU budgets the EU budget is funded by basically member states simply paying into it. This recovery fund is funded by common debt. So basically, the member states tell the European Commission, "Oh, you can go on the markets to take out a loan on behalf of us." And then we will use that money that has been borrowed by the EU, which is technically, I think, illegal if you interpret the treaties strictly, but they did not do that. What is the problem here, and what is the connection with EU taxation? At one point, these loans that have been used for recovery spending, COVID recovery spending, which amounts to, I think, 800 billion euro. These loans that the European Commission has been taking on behalf of European citizens and EU member states, they will need to be paid back. Then there are, three options. The first option is that the European EU member states simply give the money to the Commission, and then the Commission pays it back. That's not going to happen because many member states are, let's say, cash-strapped. The second option is that member states give taxation power to the EU executive, the European Commission, to directly tax EU citizens in order to be able to pay back these loans. Also not going to happen, I think. The third option is, of course, the most likely, is that the member states tell the Commission, look, why don't you take out a new loan to pay back for the old loan, which is standard procedure at the member state level. This is most likely because it's the most convenient politically. But the problem is that it means that this very problematic COVID recovery fund is likely to remain in place forever. And even worse, at some point, I could imagine European politicians saying, look, why don't we try to avoid this 7-year ordeal of having to fight for who should pay how much for the EU budget, and let's take the easier route, which is just take on more debt to pay back for the old debt, and basically burn the grandchildren with ever more debt.
From a historical perspective, is the process of EU integration an inherently one-way street that was always designed to become federal structure one day? Or can this process also be turned around, hypothetically, and decentralize if the members wish it?
On the current path, it will eventually collapse, because at some point there will be such an enormous disconnect between what the EU has become and the democratic legitimacy it has for this. Then when it will collapse, which I think may coincide with the collapse of the euro, which is still a very shaky construct, when there's going to be like a real crisis, I think there's a chance it will collapse. Actually, it almost collapsed when Greece, tiny Greece, was in need of a bailout, even if they had very high debt. And after that, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus, Ireland. But of course, these were all periphery countries. They could paper this over, print a bit more. But in the future, if you have a real financial crisis of a major member states, Italy, even France, Belgium, my own country, this is absolutely not excluded, then I want to see the euro surviving. So just to say, I'm not somebody who predicts the euro will collapse tomorrow. I think if they print enough and rip off savers enough, they can perfectly, save it. And Germany is willing to go very far. You see how far they are now going with their suicidal energy policies. So for the euro, I'm afraid they will do the same. when it collapses, then it's important that people have a perfect alternative in mind. And therefore, it's very important to continue to make the case for reform of the EU, even if you realize that it's actually quite unlikely that this will be implemented. Any bureaucracy is of course, always keen to expand its powers, but it's not in the nature of the political process to implement these major reform programs. I mean, this is politically very painful to do, which is why it's unlikely to happen. But if you have a major cataclysmic event, then I do think people will look for an alternative. And then if you have been propagating the alternative of the original idea of a European Union focused on scrapping barriers to trade, on facilitating economic interaction, on making sure people can travel easily from one country or move country between in the EU. So if you have people making that case, then I'm strongly convinced that after the collapse, that the political consensus will be: look, not everything was bad. We had some good things. It made sense to make sure it's easy to travel, to make sure it's easy to buy a car, or to sell goods in another European country. So why don't we go with the more modest version of what the EU was and abandon all these sort of the imperial overstretch that have led to the collapse.
Thank you so much, Mr. François, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting.
Earlier in the studio, we talked about abolishing the veto and reducing member states' competencies, but there are other treaty change proposals that are worth mentioning too. For instance, there is a lot of talk about establishing a European citizenship and even giving voting rights to mobile citizens. What does that actually mean?
We don't really know what does that mean, but I can tell you from where it's coming from. I remember this project was introduced by Emmanuel Macron when he was the president of the EU for quite a while. It was 6 months ago, something like that. He proposed to have an EU citizenship that would allow to any European or any national from the EU to have one only and sole passport from the European Union. And we don't know what does that mean, because there is no clear definition of what would be it. It's just this flag that we see in the European Parliament and European institutions. But we do believe that the only possibility and the only historical reference is, of course, our own nations. So they want really to delete every single differences we would have, to create an identity that did not exist. There is no languages, there's just only one flag and one anthem. But I am French and I'm very proud to be French. And in some extent, I'm very happy to cooperate on some topics on the EU, but I don't feel European. I'm firstly French.
The right order of things.
Exactly.
Other proposals floating around in the European Parliament is about lowering the voting age to 16 in EU elections, creating the legal basis for an EU-wide referenda, and establishing a new unelected advisory body from randomly selected individuals. What is the aim of all these, and would these change the balance of power in Brussels?
It's a very interesting question. So first of all, they wanted to get back the voting age for the European elections and or for the referenda in EU at 16. We are definitely against, because we do think that you need to be an adult to be able to vote, and they wanted to have this all around Europe, because the project behind is to have an EU constituency, meaning that, for example, for European topics and European elections, you won't vote as a French, but you will vote as a European on a European list. That's the big project, to really take a very long distance between the people and the European Union. We know that we have a clear issue with the non-transparency of these institutions in general in Brussels. So I think they're very happy to take a distance. They want to be as far as possible, but we remember to every member elected in the European Parliament, you are elected by the French people. You should defend the interests of the French people in the frame of this EU, but you are not an unelected or elected member from a body very far from your country. So we definitely are going to fight against these proposals. We are going to fight against this lowering it to 16 years old, and we will see what we did. So, of course, the European Union is specialized to create some very distant and unknown body to control or not to control European citizens. So we have some very serious questions, because in France, we have a legal court which is in charge of checking the elections. And we do believe that this court is doing its job for more than since our constitution exists. So we do believe in this, but who are going to be these people? Are they going to be elected? Are they going to have to respect some engagement regarding the institutions in order to keep their jobs? So we are going to tackle that, of course. And the last part of the question was regarding the result of that. We know that they imagine that if they create one single big constituency in the European Union, they will have bigger results for the federalists. I don't think it's going to work like that, because people are very much attached to their institutions, very much attached to their own country, to their own presidency, to their own prime minister, and to have a very close level of decision. I'm a member of the national parliament, and I'm very happy to meet my constituent, and my constituents are very happy to meet me and to bring in Brussels or to bring in Paris what is really important for them. And I think we can bet about something. I would be very happy to see a Spitzenkandidat, as I say, the EU candidacy of one list. I can bet and make a bet with the European Union. We can make a list of Marine Le Pen all around Europe, and I'm sure the result is going to be outstanding in every other European country.
Your party, National Rally, is part of the ID group whose shadow rapporteur was completely left out from the negotiations. So it's very clear that the leftist majority is the one that allows the proposals, the reform to take this direction. How do you see this discussion evolve after the June elections?
I'm really looking forward the 9th of June, because we have seen this institution during the last election. So I just recall that the list of the Rassemblement National and conducted by Jordan Bardella won the last European elections. And even though we were sitting in the ID group, it was one of the major opposition group in this European Parliament, the leftist majority and federalist majority decide, and it's probably the only parliament around the world who decide to exclude totally from any political and from any legislative work one opposition party. It's really unbelievable. I think it's not going to be possible anymore during the last elections, because for the next 9th of June, our list is credited of more than 31%. So it means that for the first time in the French history, we would be able to bring in the European Parliament 30 to 31 members, and that would bring the Rassemblement National as a sole party, the biggest delegation present in the European Parliament. So I'm sure the leftists and the federalists are trying to make some arrangements again to try to exclude any opposition. We, of course, are going to oppose to this exclusion, which is impossible, because it means that the European Parliament and the other groups would assume that they would be very happy and glad to exclude 30 to 31% of the French people from any serious decision. They should be credible. The European Parliament and the European institutions are giving lessons to all the world, but in their own parliament, they manage to exclude some part of the member because they have a dissident or divergent opinion. And just an example, in the National Assembly, we have 88 members of the Assembly. We have 2 vice presidents of the Assembly. We, of course, cooperate in every committee. So we will not allow that is going to happen again after the next European elections.
Thank you so much, Mr. François.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned, because we will be back soon with more topics that are of vital interest to European citizens.